I mean, it's clearly a troubling time. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that the Northern Ireland Protocol isn't working.
Yeah.
How you resolve it is, not necessarily an easy thing, but obviously there's a potential to set aside or to invoke Article 16, which does give either side the right to essentially, as you know, Arlene, suspend the protocol if it's having particularly acute social or environmental or economic impacts. I think there's arguably a case to say that clearly is happening on Northern Ireland. I think there's a danger that the government is getting into a situation where it's almost now being seen as a bluff that they're going to invoke Article 16 and the other side says, well, they've threatened that before and clearly they're not going to play that card because if they were, they would have done it when they first threatened it. I mean, I'm interested, Arlene, in the dynamics of the internal debate within Northern Ireland because I know there was this accusation levelled at the DUP, which obviously you'll be aware of, that actually the DUP are boycotting the Assembly simply because they don't like the idea of a nationalist First Minister. I mean, what's the truth on that?
Well, it's clearly nonsense because, of course, the DUP came out of the executive long before the election that put Michelle O'Neill in as the putative First Minister. And in any event, as the point I've made all along, and I know this from being First Minister, the First Minister cannot act without the consent of the Deputy First Minister and vice versa. It's a bit of a strange scenario. It's a joint office. So that office can't act unless the two people in the office agree. So this idea that the DUP doesn't want to be in government because she is the First Minister is clearly a nonsense. But it is a way in which they ramp up the pressure in Northern Ireland, get nationalists to believe that, before an election comes about.
Is the Belfast Agreement out of date, Arlene, in the sense that obviously it was very much set along the lines of power sharing between the nationalists and the unionist communities? Northern Ireland is something of a different community now to what it was 24 years ago when the Belfast Agreement was signed. You've obviously seen the emergence of more centrist parties which don't explicitly fall into either nationalist or unionist camp. And, for example, one of the leaders of the alliance parties was saying, well, actually, if the DUP are not interested in sitting, well, we are. So therefore, all it should take is for the other parties to say they want the Assembly to continue and the DUP shouldn't have a veto. Is there any truth in that?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with that argument is that she didn't make that argument at the time when Sinn Féin had us out of government for 3 years between 2017 and 2020. So it does seem to be a little strange that she's making that argument now. But the second issue is the Belfast Agreement was based on this mutual consent, if you like, the consent of nationalism and the consent of unionism. And the point you're making is there's now a bit in the middle, if you like, a third section that is saying, look, we're neither unionist or nationalist. We just want to get on and govern Northern Ireland. That's a pretty fundamental challenge to what is the Belfast Agreement. And, of course, we're coming up to the 25th anniversary of the agreement in April next year. And it looks like we're not going to have a devolved administration at that particular point in time unless the UK government actually deals with the issue of the protocol.
But will we not find ourselves... I mean, the election takes place then in the new year or whenever it takes place.
I'm not convinced it will take place in the new year, actually. I think probably what will happen is he'll pass legislation and then there'll be a period of, set aside for talks or whatever.
But if it does, are we not just going to find ourselves in the same situation?
Exactly.
If the political landscape hasn't changed in terms of the protocol, I mean, what would be the point of the election?
Well,